March 8, 1944. Dawn breaks slow over Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. The jungle breathes with moisture and menace. Somewhere in the green tangle ahead, a Japanese bunker sits invisible, dug deep into coral and volcanic rock, its firing ports watching the American lines like cold eyes. 32 men crouch in a drainage ditch 200 yards from the target. They are soldiers of the 93rd Infantry Division, United States Army. They are also black men in a white man's war, tasked with a mission no one believes they can complete. Their uniforms are soaked through. Their rifles are slick with humidity. Their faces show no fear, only focus. Staff Sergeant William Scarborough checks his watch. 5 minutes. Behind him, Private James Turner adjusts the sling on his M1 Garand. Corporal Eddie Mason grips a satchel charge like it's his lifeline. No one speaks. They've been told this bunker has repelled 3 previous assaults. They've been told to expect casualties. They've been told, in whispers and smirks, that they aren't ready for this kind of fight. They are about to prove otherwise. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, over 1 million African Americans served in the armed forces. They served in a military that did not trust them, did not promote them, and did not believe they could fight. The army was segregated by policy. Black soldiers trained in separate camps, ate in separate mess halls, and were commanded almost exclusively by white officers. They were assigned to labor battalions, supply units, and construction crews, jobs deemed safe, menial, and far from glory. The reasoning was rooted in prejudice disguised as doctrine. Military leadership believed black soldiers lacked the intelligence, discipline, and courage required for combat. Studies were commissioned to justify this. Reports were written. The myth became policy, and policy became structure. Even as fascism spread across Europe and the Pacific, the U.S. military maintained a system of internal segregation that mirrored the Jim Crow South. But war is a crucible. It demands bodies and it demands results. By 1943, the need for combat troops in the Pacific theater had grown desperate. Japanese forces controlled vast stretches of island territory, from the Philippines to the Solomons. Each island was a fortress. Each beach was a killing ground. The 93rd Infantry Division, composed entirely of African American enlisted men and NCOs, was activated in May 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It was the first black division sent to the Pacific. They arrived in the South Pacific in early 1944, deployed to islands like Bougainville, where the jungle was as deadly as the enemy. Bougainville was not a footnote. It was a strategic anchor in the Solomon Islands chain, a launching point for future operations against Rabaul and the Philippines. The Japanese had fortified it with ruthless efficiency. Bunkers carved into hillsides. Spider holes hidden beneath roots. Machine gun nests covering every approach. The terrain favored defense and the Japanese knew it. American commanders viewed the 93rd with suspicion. There were doubts about morale, doubts about capability, doubts whispered in command tents and typed into after-action reports before a single shot was fired. The division was assigned to static defense, perimeter patrols, and rear area security, roles that kept them away from the heaviest fighting. It was containment, not confidence. But containment only lasts until someone needs a job done. By March 1944, American forces had been grinding through Bougainville's interior for months. Progress was slow. Casualties were mounting. And there was one bunker, a reinforced concrete and log structure on a ridgeline overlooking a key supply route, that had become a problem. It commanded the terrain. Its interlocking fields of fire made frontal assault nearly suicidal. 3 attempts had been made. 3 times, American troops had been forced back, leaving wounded men in the mud and shattered confidence in their wake. Command needed that bunker taken. They needed it done quietly, quickly, and without another bloody failure. That's when they turned to the 93rd. The bunker itself was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Built into the slope of Hill 260, it sat 30 feet below the ridgeline, camouflaged by vegetation and shadow. Its walls were reinforced with coconut logs, coral stone, and packed earth, thick enough to withstand mortar fire and small arms indefinitely. 2 firing slits faced downslope, covering the only viable approach with interlocking arcs of fire. A 3rd slit covered the left flank. Inside, an estimated 12 to 15 Japanese soldiers waited, supplied with ammunition, water, and orders to hold at all costs. Intelligence reports suggested the bunker was part of a larger network. If it fell, the entire defensive line could collapse. If it held, American forces would remain pinned, unable to advance without exposing their flanks. The Japanese commanders understood this. They had reinforced the position after each failed American assault, rotating in fresh troops and resupplying under cover of darkness. They believed the position was impregnable. They also believed the men coming for it were not capable of taking it. The 93rd Infantry Division had been on Bougainville for 6 weeks. They had dug foxholes, strung wire, and patrolled the jungle in 100-degree heat and monsoon rain. They had seen combat, brief, chaotic firefights in the green hell where visibility ended at 20 yards. They had taken casualties. They had also inflicted them. But they had not been given a mission like this. Not a deliberate assault. Not a tactical objective that mattered. When the order came down, it was delivered with barely concealed doubt. The officer who briefed them, a white captain from division headquarters, made it clear this was a test. He laid out the tactical situation with clinical precision. The bunker's location, its fields of fire, the failure of previous attempts. He did not say the words, but the subtext was unmistakable. Can you do what white units could not? Staff Sergeant William Scarborough, a 32-year-old machinist from Alabama, was chosen to lead the assault team. He had enlisted in 1942, trained at Fort Huachuca, and earned his stripes through competence and quiet authority. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The men under him respected him because he respected them, and because when he gave an order, it was the right one. Scarborough studied the terrain for 2 days. He crawled through the underbrush at night, mapping approach routes and estimating distances. He noted the bunker's blind spots, small angles where the firing slits could not reach. He observed the Japanese routine, when they fired, when they rotated sentries, when they seemed most alert. He did not rush. He did not improvise. He planned. The team he assembled was 32 men. Riflemen, automatic weapons specialists, demolition experts. Every man was a volunteer. Every man understood the odds. They rehearsed the assault in a clearing 2 miles from the front, using logs and rope to simulate the bunker's dimensions. They practiced movement, fire discipline, and grenade throws until muscle memory replaced thought. There was no bravado. No speeches. Just preparation. On the evening of March 7th, Scarborough gathered the team in a shallow ravine. He went over the plan one last time. Approach under cover of pre-dawn darkness. Use smoke and suppressive fire to blind the firing slits. Advance in 2 teams. One to fix the enemy's attention, the other to flank and breach. Satchel charges to collapse the entrance. Close quarters clearance if needed. Extract immediately. One man asked the question no one wanted to voice. What if we take casualties? Scarborough looked at him. We won't. It was not arrogance. It was certainty. The kind that comes from preparation meeting purpose. At 0400 hours on March 8th they moved out. The jungle swallowed them whole. Behind them the rest of the division waited. Some prayed. Some doubted. Some wondered if they would ever see those 32 men again. None of them knew they were about to witness something that would rewrite assumptions, shatter stereotypes, and leave Japanese commanders staring at their maps in disbelief. The men of the 93rd carried more than rifles and grenades. They carried the weight of every slur, every closed door, every assumption that their skin made them less. Most had grown up in the Jim Crow South, where separate was never equal and dignity was something you fought for daily. They had enlisted knowing the military would treat them as second-class soldiers. They did it anyway, some out of patriotism, some for steady pay, some because staying home meant sharecropping and lynchings and a future with no horizon. Private James Turner, 19 years old, had picked cotton in Georgia until the day he turned 18. He walked 7 miles to the recruiting station and lied about his father's permission. The recruiter looked him over, shrugged, and handed him papers. Turner had never been north of Atlanta. Now he was 10,000 miles from home, preparing to assault a fortified position held by an enemy that would kill him without hesitation. But the enemy in front of him was not the only one. The enemy behind him, the one that doubted his courage, questioned his competence, and expected him to fail, was just as real. Corporal Eddie Mason had been a steelworker in Pittsburgh before the war. He had seen combat in the jungle skirmishes, had watched men die in mud and darkness, and had learned that survival required more than luck. It required trust. And trust, in a segregated army, was something you built within your own unit, among men who understood what it meant to serve a country that did not fully claim you. These men did not speak much about the racism they faced. It was constant, ambient, exhausting. What they spoke about was the mission. What they focused on was each other. Scarborough had told them the night before, "They think we can't do this. Let's show them what we are." That was enough. The previous assaults had failed because they relied on brute force. Infantry charges across open ground, supported by mortar fire that did little more than churn mud and announce intentions. The bunker's defenders simply waited, then opened fire at close range. American casualties mounted. Morale fractured. The bunker remained. Scarborough's plan was different. It was built on patience, deception, and exploiting the one thing the Japanese did not expect: silence. The approach began at 0430, 90 minutes before sunrise. The jungle was still dark, the air thick with mist. Scarborough split the team into three elements. The first, led by Corporal Mason, would move directly toward the bunker's front, staying low in the drainage ditch that ran within 200 yards of the position. They would not engage. They would simply get close, invisible, waiting. The second element, under Sergeant Leon Harper, would circle wide to the left, using the jungle's density to mask movement. Their job was to position themselves on the bunker's blind side, the angle where the firing slits could not reach. Once in place, they would wait for the signal. The third element, Scarborough's own, would approach from the right with satchel charges, smoke grenades, and a Browning automatic rifle. They were the hammer. But the hammer only falls when the enemy is looking the wrong way. Timing was everything. At 0545, as the first gray light touched the treetops, Mason's element would throw smoke grenades toward the bunker's front. The Japanese, conditioned by previous assaults, would expect an attack from that direction. They would shift their attention, adjust their weapons, prepare to repel what they thought was coming. That's when Harper's team would move. Not running. Not charging. Moving deliberately, using the smoke and the distraction to close the distance. Scarborough's team would move simultaneously from the right, advancing under cover of suppressive fire from the bar. The goal was not to overwhelm. It was to arrive unnoticed, strike decisively, and neutralize the position before the enemy could coordinate a response. It was a plan that required discipline, coordination, and absolute trust. One mistake, one man out of position, one premature shot, and the mission would collapse into chaos. Scarborough had drilled them until there were no mistakes left to make. The weapons carried by Scarborough's team were standard infantry issue, but their application would be surgical. Each rifleman carried an M1 Garand, 8 rounds of .30-06 ammunition, semi-automatic, reliable in jungle humidity. The Garand's advantage was not firepower but accuracy and speed. In close quarters, hesitation meant death. The M1 eliminated hesitation. Corporal Mason and 2 others carried Thompson submachine guns, .45 caliber, close-range devastation, ideal for bunker interiors where sight lines collapsed to 5 feet and reaction time measured in heartbeats. The Thompson was heavy, prone to jamming in mud, but maintained meticulously. It became an extension of will. Sergeant Harper's element included Private DeWitt Clinton, who carried the Browning automatic rifle. 20 pounds of sustained firepower. The bar's role was suppression, to pin the enemy behind their firing slits, to fill the air with lead and fear while others moved. Clinton had trained on the weapon until he could change magazines in darkness by feel alone. He would need that skill. The satchel charges were improvised, canvas bags packed with composition C2 explosive, blasting caps, and timed fuses. Each charge weighed 12 pounds and could collapse a reinforced entrance or blow a firing slit into rubble. Scarborough carried 2. So did Private Elijah Moore, a demolition specialist from North Carolina who had worked dynamite in coal mines before the war. Moore understood explosives the way a pianist understands keys, by touch, by intuition, by respect for what happens when you get it wrong. Fragmentation grenades, Mark II pineapples, hung from every man's webbing. The plan called for grenades to be used sparingly, only when necessary to clear confined spaces or neutralize resistance too close for rifle work. In the hands of trained men, a grenade was not a weapon of chance. It was geometry and timing. But the most important weapon was silence. No one fired until Scarborough gave the signal. No one moved until their sector was clear. Discipline, not firepower, would win this fight. Inside the bunker, 15 Japanese soldiers waited. They were veterans of the Solomon Islands campaign, survivors of Guadalcanal and the grinding warfare that had consumed thousands. They had seen American Marines charge across coral beaches. They had watched B-17s darken the sky. They had held positions until ordered to withdraw, and they had withdrawn only to dig in again, deeper, harder. The bunker was their fortress. They had reinforced it after each American attempt, adding layers of logs and stone, repositioning ammunition crates for better access, clearing sight lines with machetes. They knew the jungle around them. They knew the sounds that meant danger and the sounds that meant nothing. They were confident. Their commander, a sergeant whose name would later appear in captured documents as Hideaki Tanaka, had told them the Americans lacked patience. They would come again, he said. They would come with mortars and charging infantry and they would fail again. Hold the position. Conserve ammunition. Wait for them to expose themselves, then cut them down. The Japanese had no reason to expect anything different. The previous assaults had been clumsy, predictable. Frontal attacks that announced themselves with artillery and ended in retreat. The Americans, Tanaka believed, fought with equipment but not with intelligence. They relied on firepower because they lacked discipline. He did not know that 32 men were already moving through the jungle, invisible and silent. He did not know that the next assault would come from 3 directions simultaneously, coordinated with precision he had not seen from American forces. He did not know that the men coming for his bunker had something to prove, not just to the enemy in front of them but to the command behind them. He would learn. Staff Sergeant William Scarborough was not a man who sought attention. He had grown up in rural Alabama, learned discipline from his father, a sharecropper who demanded excellence because the world demanded it of black men who wanted to survive. Scarborough enlisted because staying home meant accepting limits he refused to accept. The army gave him a rifle and a rank. He made both matter. On Bougainville he became the kind of leader men followed not because they had to, but because they trusted him. He did not ask his soldiers to do anything he would not do first. He did not make promises he could not keep. And when he said, "We won't take casualties," it was not bravado. It was a commitment. He had planned every step. He had accounted for every variable. The mission would succeed because failure was not an option he had allowed into the plan. As the teams moved into position, Scarborough did not think about history. He did not think about proving anything to anyone beyond the immediate task. His mind was focused on spacing, timing, and the moment when he would give the signal. Everything else, the racism, the doubts, the weight of representation, fell away. There was only the mission. And the mission was about to begin. 0543 hours. The jungle holds its breath. Mason's element lies flat in the drainage ditch, 200 yards from the bunker's front. The mist clings low to the ground. Visibility is 30 feet, maybe less. Every man's heart hammers, but their hands are steady. Mason checks his watch. 2 minutes. To the left, Harper's team has reached the bunker's blind side. They are 15 yards from the structure now, close enough to hear voices inside. Japanese, low and calm, the sound of men who believe they are safe. Harper raises his fist. His men freeze. They do not breathe loud. They do not shift weight. They are shadows. On the right flank, Scarborough and his element crouch behind a fallen mahogany tree. Private Clinton has the bar braced on the log, barrel aimed at the bunker's right firing slit. His finger rests outside the trigger guard. Not yet. Scarborough's eyes are on his watch. The second hand crawls. 30 seconds. Mason pulls 2 smoke grenades from his belt. The men beside him do the same. The plan is simple. Smoke to the front. The Japanese shift attention. The flanks close in. But simplicity under fire is never simple. One wrong move, one man seen too early, and the bunker erupts in automatic fire that will shred anyone caught in the open. 15 seconds. Scarborough glances left, then right. Every man is in position. Every weapon is ready. He can feel the weight of the satchel charge on his back. He thinks, briefly, of the officers who doubted this moment would come. He thinks of the men who said his soldiers were not ready. He signals Mason. 0545 hours. Mason pulls the pin on the first grenade, releases the spoon and counts. 1, 2, 3. He hurls it toward the bunker. The smoke canister arcs through the mist and lands 20 feet in front of the firing slits. White smoke billows instantly, thick and choking, rolling toward the bunker like a living thing. 2 more grenades follow. Then 3 more. Within seconds, the entire front of the bunker is obscured. Inside, the Japanese react exactly as predicted. Voices rise in alarm. Shapes move behind the firing slits. A machine gun bursts to life, firing blind into the smoke, tracers cutting orange lines through the white fog. The defenders are focused forward, weapons trained on the expected threat. They are looking the wrong way. Scarborough's hand drops. Clinton squeezes the trigger. The bar roars. 20 rounds hammer the right firing slit in 4 seconds, chewing into logs and stone, forcing the gunner inside to duck, to flinch, to lose his sight picture. Clinton does not stop. He empties the magazine, ejects it, slams in a fresh one and fires again. The noise is deafening. The effect is total. Harper's team moves. They cover 15 yards in seconds, staying low, weapons up. Harper reaches the bunker's left side first, a blind corner just as Scarborough had mapped it. He presses his back against the rough logs, breathing hard but controlled. 2 men stack behind him. A third, Private Leroy Jackson, pulls a grenade, holds it ready. On the right, Scarborough and Moore sprint forward under the cover of Clinton's fire. They reach the bunker's flank 10 feet from the entrance. The entrance is a low rectangular opening, reinforced with timber, partially obscured by hanging vines. Smoke drifts everywhere. The machine gun inside is still firing forward, still blind. Scarborough unslings the satchel charge. Moore does the same. They move to the entrance in a crouch. No one inside has seen them yet. No one expects them. The Japanese are trained to defend against frontal assault. This is not that. Moore places his charge against the left support beam. Scarborough places his against the right. They arm the fuses, 30 seconds. They do not run. They move deliberately back to cover, counting steps, breathing through adrenaline. 20 seconds. Inside the bunker, someone shouts. Maybe they have seen the charges. Maybe they have realized the firing has stopped from the right. It does not matter now. 10 seconds. Scarborough presses himself against the coral stone. Clinton stops firing. The jungle falls into a sudden, terrible silence. 5 seconds. The explosion is not loud. It is a pressure, a force that bends air and sound inward. The bunker's entrance collapses in a shower of splintered logs and dust. The blast wave ripples through the structure. Men inside scream. The machine gun goes silent. Harper does not wait. He moves to the entrance, now half buried in rubble. Jackson throws the grenade inside, a clean toss through the gap. They turn away, cover their ears. The second explosion is muffled, contained. Smoke and dust pour from the firing slits. Scarborough signals. Mason's element moves up, Thompson's ready. They converge on the entrance from 3 sides, covering every angle. The smoke begins to clear. No return fire. No movement. Mason reaches the entrance first. He peers inside, weapon up. The interior is chaos. Collapsed beams, shredded equipment, bodies motionless in the dust. He counts. 12. No, 13. Some are wounded, groaning. None are fighting. Scarborough enters next, sweeping left. Harper enters from the right. They clear the interior in seconds. Every corner, every shadow. The bunker is neutralized. Not a single American soldier is wounded. The silence inside the bunker is thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Dust hangs in the air, illuminated by shafts of light cutting through the shattered firing slits. Scarborough's eyes adjust quickly. The interior is smaller than he imagined. Maybe 12 feet deep, 8 feet wide, reinforced with coconut logs and iron scrap. Ammunition crates are stacked against the back wall. A Type 92 heavy machine gun lies on its side, barrel twisted from the blast. The Japanese soldiers are scattered across the floor. Some are motionless. Others breathe in shallow gasps, hands pressed to wounds, eyes wide with shock. One soldier, younger than most, stares at Scarborough without blinking. No hatred. No defiance. Just disbelief. Mason moves through the space methodically, checking bodies, securing weapons. He kicks a rifle away from an outstretched hand. Harper pulls grenades from belts, tosses them outside to be disposed of safely. Every movement is deliberate. There is no celebration. No adrenaline fue let's shouting. Just soldiers doing the job they were trained to do. Outside, Clinton maintains overwatch, the bar trained on the treeline. The rest of the team forms a defensive perimeter, scanning for counterattack. The jungle is silent. No movement. No secondary positions opening fire. The bunker had been isolated, as intelligence suggested. But assumptions in combat are dangerous. They wait. Scarborough steps back outside, blinking in the pale dawn light. He checks his watch. 0551 hours. 6 minutes from first smoke to bunker secure. He does a head count. 32 men. Every single one standing. No stretchers needed. No medic called forward. Not one casualty. He radios back to company headquarters. Objective secured. 0 friendly losses. Bunker neutralized. There is a long pause on the other end. Then the company commander's voice, careful, skeptical. Say again your last? Objective secured, Scarborough repeats, his tone flat, factual. Bunker taken. No casualties. Another pause. Longer this time. The response, when it comes, carries a weight Scarborough does not expect. Copy. Hold position. Command is sending confirmation. Confirmation. As if they do not believe it. Mason looks at Scarborough, eyebrow raised. Scarborough shakes his head. It does not matter. The mission is complete. What anyone chooses to believe is irrelevant. The bunker is theirs. The route is open. The objective is achieved. 10 minutes later, a white lieutenant arrives with a squad of infantry. He approaches cautiously as if expecting a trap. His eyes sweep the perimeter, the collapsed entrance, the prisoners being moved into the open under guard. He counts the American soldiers. He looks for stretchers, for blood, for any sign of the cost this kind of assault always demands. He finds none. He walks to the bunker entrance, peers inside, then turns to Scarborough. "You took this position without losses?" "Yes, sir." "How many enemy?" 15 inside. 13 confirmed dead or wounded. 2 fled during the assault. The lieutenant stares at him. 3 previous attempts failed. Casualties each time. "You're telling me?" "We planned it carefully, sir," Scarborough interrupts, his voice respectful but firm. "We executed as trained." The lieutenant nods slowly. He does not say what he is thinking, but Scarborough can see it in his face. Surprise. Confusion. And something else, something that looks almost like respect, grudgingly given. "Division will want a full report," the lieutenant says. "Document everything." "Yes, sir." The lieutenant leaves. The perimeter holds. By 0700 hours, engineers arrive to assess the bunker and clear the route forward. They walk through the position, examining the blast points, the fields of fire, the tactical execution. One engineer, a captain, shakes his head in admiration. "Textbook," he mutters. "Absolutely textbook." Word spreads quickly. Radio chatter carries the news up and down the line. The 93rd took the bunker. No casualties. Flawless execution. At first there is disbelief. Then questions. Then, slowly, acceptance. The mission logs are updated. The after-action reports are written. The facts are undeniable. But it is not the American command that reacts most strongly. 2 miles to the north, in a fortified command post dug into the hillside, Japanese officers receive the report. The bunker on Hill 260 has fallen. The Americans broke through. 15 men lost. The route is compromised. But it is not the loss that stuns them. Positions fall in war. Men die. Ground is traded. What stuns them is the manner of the loss. A captured Japanese sergeant, Hideaki Tanaka, is brought in for debriefing days later. He had escaped through a rear tunnel during the final assault, emerging into the jungle with 1 other soldier. American patrols found them 2 days later, dehydrated and unarmed. Under interrogation, Tanaka describes the assault in detail. The smoke. The simultaneous attack from 3 directions. The precision. The satchel charges placed with surgical accuracy. The absence of panic, of wasted fire, of the chaos that usually accompanied American infantry assaults. And then he says something that stops the interrogator. "They were Kakumin soldiers," Tanaka says, using the Japanese word for black soldiers. "We were told they were laborers, not fighters. We were told they could not fight as well as white soldiers." The interrogator, a Nisei translator, pauses. "What do you think now?" Tanaka looks at him, his face hollow with exhaustion and something else. "I think we were lied to." The interrogation report is filed. Copies are sent up the chain of command. Intelligence officers analyze it. The conclusion is added to strategic assessments. Japanese forces underestimated the combat effectiveness of African American units. This miscalculation may be exploited in future operations. But for the men of the 93rd Infantry Division, the validation does not come from reports or intelligence summaries. It comes from the silence of their critics. It comes from the bunker that stands empty on Hill 260, a monument to what disciplined soldiers can accomplish when given the mission and the trust to complete it. Scarborough sits that night in a foxhole, cleaning his rifle. Around him, the jungle hums with insects and distant artillery. Mason sits nearby, writing a letter home by flashlight. Clinton sleeps with his head on his pack, the bar within arm's reach. No one talks about what they proved. They do not need to. The mission speaks for itself. And somewhere in the darkness, the war continues. The bunker on Hill 260 became a reference point. Within 48 hours, American forces pushed forward along the route it had protected. Supply convoys moved without harassment. Artillery positions were established on ground that had been unreachable. The tactical advantage was immediate and measurable. But the psychological impact on both sides ran deeper. In the days following the assault, captured Japanese documents and prisoner interrogations revealed a pattern. Japanese intelligence had categorized American units by perceived combat effectiveness. White Marine and Army divisions were rated highest. Nisei units were noted with caution after early encounters. African American units were consistently rated as low threat, suitable for defensive positions but unlikely to execute complex offensive operations successfully. The assumption was institutional. It appeared in tactical briefings, in defensive planning, in the allocation of resources. Japanese commanders prepared for assaults by white units with layered defenses and concentrated firepower. When facing black units, they often reduced manning levels, reassigned veteran troops elsewhere, and treated the sector as secondary priority. The fall of Hill 260 shattered that calculus. Lieutenant Colonel Masaru Fujiwara, the Japanese regimental commander responsible for the sector, reviewed the battle reports with his staff. The bunker had been considered a strong point, reinforced after multiple failed American attempts, garrisoned with experienced soldiers, positioned to hold indefinitely. Its loss in 6 minutes, with total surprise and 0 attacking casualties, represented a failure of intelligence and assumption. Fujiwara's response was immediate. Orders went out across the defensive network. All positions would be treated as equally threatened, regardless of which American units faced them. Veteran troops were redistributed. Bunkers were re-inspected. Fields of fire were recalculated. The 93rd Infantry Division was reclassified in Japanese tactical assessments. They were no longer considered secondary. For the soldiers of the 93rd, recognition came slower and more grudgingly. The after-action report written by the White Company commander was clinical in its language. Objectives secured with acceptable execution. No friendly casualties reported. Acceptable. Not exceptional. Not flawless. Acceptable. The report noted the tactical success but offered no commentary on the implications. It was filed, forwarded, and largely forgotten by higher command. There were no medals recommended. No recomendaciones emitidas. No press releases issued. The 93rd had done what they were ordered to do, and in the machinery of war, that was simply expected. But within the division, the mission became legend. Word spread through the ranks, not through official channels but through the informal network soldiers build. The story was told in foxholes, in mess lines, in the quiet moments before sleep. 32 men. 0 losses. A bunker that had repelled 3 white units taken in 6 minutes by black soldiers who were told they were not ready. For men who had endured a lifetime of being told they were not good enough, not smart enough, not brave enough, the mission was proof. Not of superiority. Not of anything except equality. They could plan. They could execute. They could fight as well as anyone when given the chance. Staff Sergeant Scarborough received a battlefield promotion to Technical Sergeant 3 weeks later. The citation was brief, noting leadership and tactical proficiency in combat operations. There was no mention of the bunker. No acknowledgement of the historic nature of what his team had accomplished. Just a stripe and a handshake. Mason, Harper, Clinton, Moore, all continued their duties without fanfare. They patrolled. They dug in. They fought when called upon. The war did not pause to celebrate them. It simply continued, grinding forward through jungle and coral, island by island, death by death. But something had shifted. Other units in the 93rd began receiving more challenging assignments. Patrols deep into contested territory. Assault missions against fortified positions. Operations that required skill, courage, and trust. The division was no longer being sidelined. Slowly, grudgingly, command was learning what the Japanese had learned. These men could fight. By April 1944, elements of the 93rd were integrated into major offensives across the Solomon Islands. They fought alongside white Marine units, participated in multi-division operations, and earned the respect of commanders who had initially doubted them. The respect was not universal. Racism did not vanish because of one successful mission. But cracks appeared in the wall of assumption. And through those cracks, competence and courage found space to be seen. The broader implications of Hill 260 extended far beyond Bougainville. As the war in the Pacific intensified through 1944 and into 1945, the performance of black combat units became a question the United States military could no longer ignore. The 93rd Infantry Division continued to serve with distinction, participating in campaigns across the Northern Solomons and later in the Philippines. The 24th Infantry Regiment fought in the New Guinea campaign. The 92nd Infantry Division deployed to Italy, where despite mixed results and continued institutional racism, individual units demonstrated exceptional valor. Each success chipped away at the architecture of segregation, though the structure itself remained intact. The Army's official position did not change during the war. Segregation was policy. Integration was not considered. But operational necessity began to override prejudice in small, significant ways. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the European theater faced a crisis. German forces had shattered American lines in the Ardennes. Casualties were catastrophic. Infantry replacements were desperately needed. General John C.H. Lee made an unprecedented decision. He called for black volunteers from service units to be retrained as infantry and integrated into white combat divisions. Over 4,500 black soldiers volunteered. They were formed into platoons and attached to white rifle companies, not full integration but closer than the Army had ever come. They fought through the winter of 1945, in frozen forests and shattered villages, and they fought well. Post-battle surveys showed that white officers and soldiers who had served alongside these integrated platoons overwhelmingly supported continued integration. The experience changed minds. The lessons of Hill 260, of the 93rd, of every black unit that proved competence under fire, fed into this transformation. They became data points in a larger argument that could no longer be dismissed. By war's end, over 1 million African Americans had served. They had driven trucks, built airstrips, loaded ships, and they had also fought, bled, and died in combat. The myth of their inadequacy had been disproven in blood and action. Yet recognition remained incomplete. When the war ended in August 1945, victory celebrations swept across America. Parades filled city streets. Newsreels played in packed theaters. Heroes returned home to cheering crowds and grateful handshakes. But for black veterans, the homecoming was bittersweet. They returned to a nation still segregated, still hostile, still unwilling to extend the rights they had fought to defend. Sergeant Scarborough returned to Alabama in late 1945. He was still a black man in the Jim Crow South. The uniform meant nothing at the bus station where he was told to sit in the back. It meant nothing at the diner that refused him service. The war had changed him, but home had not changed at all. He did not speak much about Bougainville. When asked, he would say simply, "We did our job." The pride was there, quiet and unshakable, but he knew the larger fight was not over. The bunker had been taken. Equality had not. Across the country, black veterans faced the same reality. They had proven themselves in the most extreme circumstances war could create, and yet the society they returned to still saw them as less. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable for many. Some retreated into silence. Others became activists, channeling wartime courage into the civil rights movement that would explode in the 1950s and 60s. The military itself began to change, though slowly. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating the desegregation of the armed forces. The order did not immediately end segregation. Implementation took years and resistance was fierce, but it set the process in motion. The Korean War accelerated integration out of necessity. By the mid-1950s, the segregated unit was becoming a relic. The men who took Hill 260 lived to see this transformation, though most did not live to see it completed. Scarborough died in 1983, in a small house outside Montgomery. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service in one sentence. There was no mention of the bunker, no acknowledgement of the mission that had proven what black soldiers could accomplish. Mason became a factory foreman in Detroit, raising 4 children and rarely discussing the war. Harper returned to Texas, worked as a schoolteacher, and once told a history class about Bougainville, how 32 men took a bunker everyone said was impossible. The students listened politely. It was not in their textbooks. Clinton stayed in the Army after the war, serving through Korea and into the early years of Vietnam. He retired as a sergeant major in 1965, one of the first black senior NCOs in an integrated military. He kept a photograph on his desk, 32 men in jungle fatigues, standing in front of a collapsed bunker, faces exhausted but defiant. The photograph was never published. No historian requested an interview. The mission remained a footnote if it was remembered at all. But for those who were there, it was everything. It was proof that courage and competence have no color. It was evidence that when men are trained, trusted, and led well, they will accomplish the impossible. It was a moment when the assumptions of an entire military, an entire enemy, and an entire nation were proven wrong by 6 minutes of disciplined violence and unshakable resolve. The bunker on Hill 260 eventually disappeared, reclaimed by the jungle. The logs rotted. The coral stone crumbled. Vines covered the scars. Decades later, when historians visited Bougainville to map the battlefield, they found no trace of the position. Nature had erased what war had created. But the legacy remained. Not in monuments or medals, but in the quiet knowledge carried by the men who were there and passed down to those who came after. They had done what no one believed they could do. They had done it perfectly. And they had proven, once and for all, that the only limits that matter are the ones we impose on ourselves. The war moved on. History moved on. But on one morning in March 1944, 32 men changed what was possible. And they did it without losing a single life. There are battles that reshape borders and battles that reshape minds. Hill 260 was the latter. The bunker itself was nothing extraordinary: logs and coral, machine guns and ammunition, a dozen men holding ground. What made it extraordinary was what it revealed: that prejudice is not prophecy, and that assumptions shatter as easily as reinforced timber when tested by truth. The men of the 93rd Infantry Division did not set out to make history. They set out to complete a mission. They planned with precision, moved with discipline, and executed with the kind of flawless coordination that only comes from absolute trust. They succeeded not despite the doubt surrounding them, but perhaps because of it. They understood the weight of representation. They knew that failure would be used as evidence, and success would be dismissed as exception. So they left no room for doubt. In 6 minutes they dismantled more than a bunker. They dismantled a lie that had shaped military doctrine, enemy strategy, and national identity. They proved that valor is not genetic, that competence is not complexion, and that when soldiers are given the mission, the training, and the trust, they will rise to meet it, regardless of the color of their skin. The Japanese learned this lesson in shock and disbelief. American command learned it slowly, reluctantly, and incompletely. But the men who fought beside the 93rd in subsequent battles learned it in the way that matters most: through shared danger, shared sacrifice, and shared survival. Respect earned in combat has a permanence that orders and policies cannot manufacture. History often remembers the grand gestures, the famous speeches, the signed documents, the symbolic moments captured in photographs. But change happens in smaller increments. It happens in a drainage ditch at dawn, in the silence before an assault, in the discipline of men who refuse to accept the limits others place on them. It happens when 32 soldiers prove that excellence has no prerequisites except courage and skill. The war ended. The men went home. The bunker vanished into jungle and time. But the truth remained, carried forward by those who witnessed it, encoded into the foundation of a military that would eventually recognize what those men had always known: that the measure of a soldier is not the color of his uniform, but the content of his character and the precision of his execution under fire. On March 8, 1944, on a ridgeline in the Solomon Islands, that truth was written in smoke and silence and the stunned disbelief of an enemy who had underestimated the men standing in front of them. It is a truth that echoes still.